This fact happened when I was 15 years old, beginning of last year, 2018, when I finally got to sophomore year here in Brazil. It was an ordinary Friday night. Suddenly, I felt a little bit hungry, so I decided to put on some clothes and go to the snack bar. It was barely 10 minutes from my house. I usually pass through the alley to go to the snack bar, but that time, everything was so creepy in there. When I was halfway there, it was dark, empty, abnormally cold and gloomy. I felt slightly intimidated, but there was nothing there that could really harm me. So I decided to just go through that alley. Then I thought, nothing's gonna happen. I kept going until I suddenly heard something weird on the other side of the alley. There was a man in there, staring at the walls in hunchback stance, grunting weirdly. I found that incredibly creepy, but I was nearly at the snack bar, so all I needed was just to get out of that alley. Walk 1 minute more and I finally would get there, instead of making it all the way home with empty hands. Thus, I decided to ignore him and pass through after all. I finally passed through him. He turned to me and stared at me with a creepy smile, which made me walk a little bit faster, trying to avoid him. Then, suddenly, I heard a grunt and quick steps behind me. When I looked back, it was him. We were barely 2 feet away from each other. He had a kitchen knife in his right hand and jumped on me with amazing speed and tried to stab me. I managed to grab both of his arms before he could get me. However, since he was charging at me, he still had more energy to push me back and force me against a wall. I was terrified with all of that. I knew I would die if I didn't fight back. Back then, I was already trained in some martial arts to defend myself, but that I thought I'd never need to use that skill to defend my life until now. So, in a sudden burst of adrenaline, I managed to twist the wrist which he was holding the knife, kicking his stomach and punching him mercilessly in the face several times. In the end, his face was bleeding so much, but his body was ignoring the pain of the blows in his body and only focusing on killing me. Finally, I used a training that I took before to twist both of his wrists and elbows harshly at the same time, forced in 2 different directions, and kicked the backside of his leg, putting him to the ground until ultimately he could drop the knife. It wasn't easy because he was struggling and punching my back and somehow trying to jump on me. But since I had his arm under my grasp, he couldn't do much without breaking himself. I slammed his head in the concrete ground, stunning him, then kept striking his face desperately while kneeling over his arm so he wouldn't be able to react or reach his knife again. Then finally, he was out cold, bleeding a lot. My knuckles were full of blood and hurt. So I got up, took his knife, throwing it far away from there, and ran away from him. I finally got to the snack bar, washed my hands in there, and did everything I had to do before going back home. But obviously, I didn't take the same path as I did before. But there were things that got much creepier. That was at the entrance of my apartment, where I heard screams coming from the other side of the street. It was the same crazy man. Now, seeming like he was possessed by a demon, and he was slamming his head on the iron door of my building's entrance. His face was horribly deformed and scarred from our fight. That freaked me out completely. My parents were on a trip and the watchman of our building was on vacation. I wasn't going to fight that man again, so I decided to rush to my girlfriend's house. When I got there, she was home alone. She looked worried because I was looking pale and there were still some marks of the man's blood on my clothes. I explained everything to her, and we called the police to come by my building. And when they arrived, the man was still in the entrance trying to force the doors unsuccessfully. When he saw the police, he attacked them, but got quickly dominated by the cops. They explained that he was probably a crazy psycho in the streets looking for prey to rape, kill, or do anything he wanted to the person. So they sent him to a high-security mental asylum for criminals far away from my house. I feel so lucky that I survived that day, and I'm hoping that I will never see that man again.
It was the spring of 2017. I was flying out to Chicago for a job interview. It was around 11 p.m. and I was sitting in my gate at the San Francisco International Airport. A storm was raging outside. Rain pouring down the windows as everyone was bundled up on the seats and keeping to themselves. I was just scanning the rows of people in seats sleeping, on laptops or phones, and wearing earbuds before I noticed this one guy. He was sitting in the farthest corner of the gate by the corridor, with no one else sitting around him. He was not on his phone or wearing headphones like everyone else. He has this huge, crooked grin plastered on his face, and he's staring directly at me. He looked pretty average in terms of looks and what he was wearing, but that grin was so creepy, it was beginning to make me shit bricks. Naturally, I turned away and pretended I hadn't seen him, but the fact that he was staring at me made me continuously turn to eye him back without realizing. Eventually, they called our gate and I boarded the plane. I took my seat in the business class right by the window and went on my phone, checking Instagram and texting friends. I did not see the creepy man boarding. An hour later, we were up in the sky. Sometime through the flight, I got up to use the bathroom, and as I was finishing up in there, someone knocked on the door. I called out, "Occupied," but the person continued knocking repeatedly and aggressively. As I was washing my hands, I ignored it, hoping it would go away, but it didn't. So I opened the door to make some ballsy remark, but froze when I saw who was in front of me. It was that guy from the airport, still with that creepy grin plastered on his face. Quickly, I pushed past him and walked to my seat, not glancing behind me. The rest of my flight went normal except for the fact that I couldn't get him off my mind. As soon as we landed in Chicago, I was the first to get my suitcase down from the overhead luggage, and the first off of that airplane. I called an Uber as I walked to the airport parking lot. It was 12 p.m. in Chicago. The Uber came and I drove to my hotel, and as I checked into my room, I realized something horrible. My wallet was missing. I don't know where I could have left it, so I called the airport and asked them to search the plane. They did so and got back to me a few hours later saying they found nothing. I drove back to the airport and spent the whole rest of the day searching and turning up nothing. My only theories were I had somehow left it at San Francisco or it had been stolen. I was able to recover and spent 3 more days walletless in Chicago. But you know what? Here's the scary part. When I got back to San Francisco and drove to my house, I discovered something disturbing. My door was unlocked, and my entire house was trashed. Everything had been broken, and anything worth a slight amount of value had been taken. I checked my security footage and was able to identify the intruder as the grinning man from the airport who, sure enough, had my wallet and therefore my keys. I called the police, who found his fingerprints all over my house. The only scary thing was that the prints did not match anyone on record.
This story happened when I was in the 9th grade. I was going home after being at my friend's apartment. He's one of my good friends, so I often visited him. It was about 9 p.m. at night. Usually I went home at 5 or 6 when I visited him, but it was final exam week, so I went home later than usual to prepare for it together. He lives on the 15th floor. I took the freight elevator down because it was quicker than the passenger elevator. The elevator is kind of old, shaky, and not really well maintained. The fan isn't working, the walls are rusty, full of graffiti, and the light flickers, as you would expect from an old building's elevator. At the moment, there were 3 or 4 people with me going down to the lobby. The elevator went down normally. Then, suddenly, at the 9th floor, the door opened. I saw one of my other friends. Her name is Billy. She was playing, laughing with some kids who I assumed to be her friends. Then she looked at me and smiled. I stared at her for a moment, but I didn't reply to her because, well, we're not that close. Nothing came to mind to say. So the elevator closed back up and took me to the lobby. But soon, I realized that no one that was on the elevator with me seemed to notice those kids, despite the loud laughter they made. But once again, I didn't care about it, so I went back home and rested. The day after, I saw Villy again. Out of curiosity, I asked her, "Hey, why were you playing so late at night? Why didn't you stay at home?" She looked confused, as if I was asking her a random question. She then asked me, "Well, what do you mean? I didn't go anywhere yesterday. I was at my house." I was a bit confused, and I couldn't believe what she just said. She then asked me again, "Well, what was I wearing yesterday?" I answered, "You wore a white t-shirt, right?" I was hoping that she would say yes, but she said no. I felt my heart dropping. If it wasn't her that I saw last night, then who? A few days later, as usual, I was visiting my friend and went home late again. I waved goodbye to him as I was walking the corridor. One thing came to mind. How am I going to get down? Remembering those elevator things, I took the stairs. Well, I guess it wasn't a really good decision, but at least better than that scary elevator. I walked down the dark stairwell. Once in a while, I looked at the open part, and this time, I saw a shadow figure looking out from the balcony across. It seemed normal to me, probably a person looking down, so I kept on walking. Watching my step, I looked back up again, and suddenly, the shadow figure thing disappeared into nowhere in just a blink of an eye. I was so scared thinking about how the hell did that guy disappear that quickly? By jumping down the balcony? My steps went quicker, but to my astonishment, I saw the sign 8th floor, which means I saw that figure when I was on the 9th floor. That same floor that I witnessed the ghost Villy. Soon I called my friend and told him about it. He was surprised and told me that a lot of people also said that the 9th floor is actually haunted. There was once a guy that died there, but was found rotting in his apartment room 3 days later.
Hi, I live in a city of Philippines. This incident happened to me a while ago, but it reminded me forever and ever. That day, I was staying outside for some schedule, and it was kind of late, so I thought that I have no choice but to take a jeepney, which is a public vehicle in the Philippines, to ride back home. The street was pretty quiet, as I saw one jeepney was going to pass through, so I waved my hand. And when I just entered a jeepney, my eye directly reached a woman besides the driver's seat. The woman looked asleep beside the driver, and for her head is resting at his shoulders, so I thought that woman was a girlfriend of the driver. I sat to behind side, and in my front view of my seat, there was an old man, so there were only 4 passengers during that time. The inside of jeepney was quiet. Nobody was talking, and I didn't any pay attention to others. And that was the most worst things happened. When the jeepney have traveled for a few meters more, then the old man who was in front of me suddenly asked the driver to stop the vehicle and dragged me outside. At the first time, I didn't recognize what was going on. Then I was just scared of his sudden behavior, so I shouted, "Stop it!" He had no replies for a few seconds. Then he replied, "Shh, trust me." Still confused, but I quickly followed what he said because I'm very nervous that time and don't know what should I do. My mind was almost blew up. I kept thinking, what if he was going to steal something kill me? What should I do? When we already have left the jeepney, he stared me and finally told me with calm voice that the girl who was beside the driver's seat was already dead. I could not believe what was he saying. Then he said again, I saw with my own eyes. Her lips and nails were already black, and her waist had an ice pick stabbed on it and full of blood. I was shocked. If I didn't follow that old man so I didn't get off, what would be the next? The old man left behind me and said again, you should be careful next time. After that day, when I get on jeepney, I always pay attention abnormally.
Two weeks ago, I woke up in the morning to get ready for school, as usual. Because I live in a small village, there's no bus that drives to my school, so I always have to drive with my bike about 4 miles. As I didn't want to drive alone, a friend of mine would drive with me to school every day. One morning, me and my friend would meet up at our place. Driving to the place, I wasn't feeling well,